Hi, I'm John Underhill here at Underhill Creations and Casting Solutions, and in this video I want to talk to you about setting up a casting area. Now it's important that we understand a few things before we just jump into it, because we don't want to create any hazards in our shop and we don't want to create any failures in our casting room. So here's a few things that I think are important when setting up a new casting area. So obviously everybody's not going to have room for a designated casting area, although if you've ever seen my demos, one of the things I talk about is trying to have a designated casting area. It doesn't have to be anything huge. My room is literally 7 by 14. It's not a monstrous area, but it's enough to give me room to do what I need to and contain the casting mess. The last thing you want to do is be casting on the top of your table saw or your workbench and have sawdust or any debris that you've created through other projects getting in your resin. So with that in mind, if you don't have an extra area, the first thing you need to do is make sure you wipe things down real well. Take a shop vac, clean the top of your shop lights or anything that can stir up any dust or debris in your area. And what I would recommend is either lay out a plastic sheet or a piece of scrap wood on top of your table saw to work on. But if you're going to get into casting and it's going to be a routine for you, then you definitely want to have an area set up just for your casting needs. So this is my work area. As you can see, it gets used a lot. When I first built this area, everything was very clean. Everything was white and bright, and the wood was all nice. I put plastic down on the wood itself to protect it. The next thing you want to think about, and I like these silicone mats, it's just a baking mat. It's the same thing they use when baking cookies and pastries and whatnot. What's nice about this, all this resin will peel off as you go. You can just kind of pick at it and peel off the lumps, but it'll just kind of help contain the mess a little bit. It's not uncommon for me to spill resin once in a while. So a nice table, working height, the way I look at it is this. When I stand at the table, and obviously we're not all the same height, and I'm about 5'8", so when I stand here, I want to make sure when my arms are bent at a 90 degree, everything is basically right here reachable. I've also put shelves up to hold all of my mica pearls and, well, most of my mica pearls and dyes. As I need them, I'll dig them out and then set the colors I need out in front, so that way everything is nice and close. And we'll talk about that when I actually do a pour on my other videos. So I like to have everything close. That way, as I'm mixing resin, if I forgot something or an idea comes to me and I want to do something with leftover resin, everything is at arm's reach. I don't have to leave the room. I'm not wasting working time or resin. I can quickly obtain it and use it. So a workspace is important, whether it be designated or not. Make sure it's clean. The next thing, we'll go over tools. So tools are important when you're mixing resin. Some of the essential things, obviously, are safeties. So we're going to need a respirator. We're going to need safety glasses and nitrile gloves. All of this is important to protect us from the resin we're working with. The last thing you want to be doing is mixing resin and having a drop fly up and get you in the eyes. So also using these dyes, they don't always wash off your skin real easily, so if you can wear a nitrile glove, it will definitely protect you from that. And then transferring that dye to the rest of your house. Dye has a way to show up somewhere when you least expect it, whether it be on your clothes or a furniture cushion. So nitrile gloves help us contain all of that. Next, one of the biggest, most important things you can use when setting up a casting area is shop clothes. So I'm wearing a smock now. As you can see though, my shirt has resin stains on it. My shoes have resin stains on it. So whatever you're going to wear into the resin casting area, be prepared to get dye, resin, and anything else you're working with, mica powders, on these garments. So you want to make sure that you're wearing something that you're prepared to ruin. A few tools that you're going to need when mixing resin. I like to use a drill, and what I'm using is a spade bit. Another option, I've been using these paddles here too as well. I started out with something a little more aggressive, but the problem is it adds too much air into your resin. So think of this, you don't want to introduce too much air because now you've got to work at getting that air out of your resin casting. So I took a spade bit, snapped the tip off, rolled the edges on a belt sander to smooth it out, and I put it into an electric drill, and I do all my mixing with the drill. Another essential tool is a digital thermometer. And what this will do is when you get into certain castings, especially in color castings, it will help you control the temperature at which you pour at, which is important when trying to keep color separation. I'll go over all the particulars in individual videos when I show you how I cast all of this stuff, but just for setup, this will give you an idea of things that you need. A scale. A digital scale is another thing. It is a must. All of your resin is going to be either measured by volume or weight. The majority of what I use is by weight. So I like to use a digital scale, something that will measure in grams. That's the smallest unit of measurement. It helps me be more precise. A few other things that I use that you'll see up here. Bamboo sticks, little dowel rods. These are actually Chinese chopsticks, and I'll use these for swirling in colors into my different colors of dyes. That way I'm not pouring dye into a cup. I'm just using the tip of it. And again, I'll show you how to use that in that color casting video. For me, a shop clamp light. These are very important to me because in the cold weather, your resin's going to get cold, it's going to get thick, and it's going to be harder to mix, and it's going to take a lot of working time to get it mixed up. So what I like to do is I use a light bulb and I warm my resin up. And I would do that basically by, once I have my resin in my cup, I'll set my cup in front of my clamp light and I'll turn it on, and I have a cardboard box with foil lined over it, and I'll set it over it. Another thing you can use are the foil baking pans that you can get at any grocery store around, especially around Thanksgiving. Everybody cooks a turkey in them. And just set that over it. It's foil. It's going to contain the warmth, kind of like an easy bake oven. And it's just going to, you're only going to want to do this for about 15 minutes. And it's just enough to get your resin warm enough that you can pour it without accelerating that curing time. Now when it comes to actually pouring the resin and mixing it, I like to measure my resin in these cups. They're 19-ounce cups. And these are a generic cup from the local grocery store because I'll use the same cup for a week. I'll just take a marker and mark on the cup the resin, A and B, and what it is so I don't mistake them later. I also, after I weigh them in this on the scale, I pour them in here and then mix them. And that way, after everything sets up, I can just peel the cured resin out of the container and continue to reuse it. And I've been reusing this one now for about 6 months. Molds. Molds are very essential. Now I'm going to do a video on molds itself, but you're going to need to figure out what kind of molds you need, right? Your project is going to dictate the mold you should use. So we have so many options, so many types of molds. Whether it be a vertical mold, a bowl mold, depending on the color cast or embedded object or clear cast that you're going to do, you're going to need a mold. So I'll do a video specifically on mold selection because there's so much out there between custom-made stuff, commercial-made things, and recyclable containers that we already have in our own home. Lastly, you're gonna need a pressure pot. A pressure pot is very important because once you mix your resin and you get all of that resin poured in your mold, it's gonna have air bubbles in it, and you're gonna need to remove those air bubbles. The only way to do that is by putting in a pressure pot and compressing that air. A lot of people think they can use vacuum to pull them out. The problem with vacuum is when you place something in a vacuum tank, you can't see what's going on, and it's very easy to suck all the resin out of that mold. So pressure is the way to go when it comes to casting. Vacuum is for stabilizing. With a pressure pot, you basically place your molds inside, put your lid on, close it up, and inflate it to a workable pounds of pressure, and usually I stay between 40 and 50. Any more than that is unnecessary, and you could be just creating a problem for yourself. But of course, with a pressure pot, now you're going to need a compressor. So my compressor is over here in the corner, and that way I keep it far enough away from the casting table that I'm not getting anything on it, and I have a hose coming over to a retractable reel. This allows me to pull the hose out, inflate my tank, and then put the hose back away. Keeps everything clean, out of my way, and I'm not tripping over anything, and I'm not getting a bunch of resin on my hose as well. Something else that's very important for a casting area is adequate ventilation. So if you're doing this, say in a garage or an outside shop, you're fine. If you're going to be doing this, say in your basement or a small room or a room in your house, then you're going to need to think about vapors. So not all resin smell, some put off an odor, but just because you can't smell it doesn't mean it isn't harmful, right? So we talked about having a respirator, but it's important to remove those vapors, and I like to open my window up top here, and that way I can move everything out. It's a small area, I can put a box fan in it and move it. So a well-ventilated area is a must, and also proper lighting. You want to make sure that you can see what you're doing. So make sure you have a well-ventilated, well-lit area. You also want to make sure that your floors are clean. You don't want to be stepping or tripping on anything as you're getting into resin casting, because then it just creates an easier opportunity to spill or knock something over. Something else I've constructed in the back of my casting room is I have a shower curtain. I go to the dollar store, I buy the cheapest shower curtain I have, but what this allows me to do is I store a lot of my supplies up and back here, and I also keep a lot of old towels and shirts and rags, shop rags. Shop rags are very important when you're casting because you're always wiping something off. You're either wiping off your mixing bit, you're wiping off your dyes so that you can go to another container. You're always wiping something off. So I keep all that stuff because by the time you use a shop rag, what happens is when you're done with it, within an hour or so, it's really stiff because the resin hardens the fabric. So you don't get a lot of use out of one shop rag. So I always have several on hand that I can wipe my hands and my tools off and then discard it. Obviously a garbage can is very important in the casting room. So with my shower curtain, what I like to do is I will close that shower curtain, and as you can see, this one has a lot of spray paint on it, because when you get into clear casting, which is basically you're putting objects on brass tubes and then you're pouring resin around them, so the cast itself, the resin isn't the object of your eye like a color cast would be, it's the object inside. So what you have to do is spray paint your tubes and build a background so that way brass doesn't shine through whatever you're gluing on there. And this is how I do that. I use pieces of wire and I thread my brass tubes on it, and then I put a dowel rod up the middle of them to protect it, but I'll show you how I do that in the clear casting video. And then I use this as a backdrop to spray. So my casting room has a door. I can close the door. I have a window right here I can open up. I put a box fan in it in the summertime and blow all the fumes out, especially when I'm spray painting. And it doesn't contaminate the rest of the shop. It keeps everything contained. So I store my resin underneath my workbench. The resin that I'm primarily using at the time, and in this case, it's the clear A and B because I use a lot of that for my clear casting. As you get into casting, you're going to realize resin never lasts long enough. What I do, I buy them in the 80-pound sets. That way, I keep my gallon containers and I refill them from these. So this way, I can set it down here and refill it and then pour from my gallon. It's much easier to pour from a gallon container than it is from something like this, because if you pour too much, you can't pour it back in the container. It's easier to pour something back in here if I need to. But I also keep other resins back here. So I've got my white, my clear slow, other types that depending on what I'm doing, I may use an epoxy. So everything is in the casting room. It's clean, it's out of the way. I don't have to worry about a kickback from the table saw, hitting one of these containers, puncturing a hole in it, and now I've got a mess in the shop. I make a big enough mess in the casting room to not worry about something out there. So back here's where I keep all of my extra molds and little things. When you're pouring resin, you're going to start to experiment. You're going to pour over things, through things. You're going to create your own molds, your own pouring devices. I've got so many different things that I've tried to get different character in my casts. So I'm not one to throw it away if it works, right? So I set it back here, and the next time I need to replicate that cast, I grab it and use it. I needed a place to store all this, and it's much easier to grab a mold off a shelf than it is to dig through a bunch of boxes. So if you have the room, put yourself a shelf up to keep things organized and keep your casting table clean, because that's where all the work's getting done. One last thing I want to share with you, which I think is the most important when you get into casting, and that's a notebook. As you can see, I have a lot of different pages and a lot of different notebooks up here, depending on the type of pours I'm going to be doing. A notebook will save your butt in the long run. There's nothing worse than experimenting with a new idea and having it turn out and then you can't replicate it. I talk about the colors that I use, the resin types that I like to use with it, how much pressure I use when I cast them, the mold selection that I had. Everything goes into a notebook page. That way, down the road, if I haven't done these in say 6 months or a year and I want to do some more, I can refresh my memory. Plus, as you try new things, you may realize, well, this material or object is very similar to something else. So I'm going to review my notes on how I cast that, and it's going to help me formulate a plan on how I'm going to try this new project. Well, that's the essential tools that I feel you need to get started in casting. Obviously, there's other opinions out there, and there's guys doing things differently than me. So before you jump in and start anything, make sure you watch as many videos as you can, go to as many demonstrations as you can, and ask all the questions you can think of on your pen making forums, your resin casting forums. Get as much information as you can, write it all down, and formulate a plan. Hey, if you like what you see, please stop back. I'll be sharing more videos on what I do here at Underhill Creations and Casting Solutions. I'm John. Thanks for joining.